Thanks all for coming. I'm Dean Ann Harrison. It's my honor to kick this off. So tonight we actually have the pleasure to hear not from me, but from 4 of our newest Haas faculty members who joined us this past fall. And we'll also be hearing from our Associate Dean for Academic Affairs, Professor Jenny Chatman. Jenny will be leading a conversation with assistant professors Ambar Forgia, Kiera Hudson, Sarah Moshary, and Valerie Zhang. They will be talking about their research interests and their reasons for joining Haas, although of course we need no reasons for joining Haas. Each one is a rock star in her own right and adds to the breadth and depth of our faculty. I am so proud of the progress we have made toward expanding our faculty and improving the representation on our faculty. This has been one of my top priorities since I became dean in January of 2019. With the support of Haas leadership, alumni, and friends, we have hired 33 professors over the last 5 years. Of those, 52% are women. In addition, we've actually completed hiring for another 6 professors who will be joining us in July, so there's more to come. We are closing in on our goal of increasing the percentage of our latter faculty by 30% by 2023. So I'm really, really excited about that. We have such an incredible, vibrant, and young faculty. It's really amazing. Now, you might ask me, why is it important to have these brilliant and promising professors? It seems kind of a strange question, but I will give you some reasons for why. Number one, it reinforces our place among the world's very best business schools. Number two, it ensures that we provide students a quality education to tackle the most pressing challenges facing business and society. And then there's a third reason for why it's really important to have this growing and amazing group of faculty coming to us from the very best places, which is for faculty to be really, truly great. They need to be surrounded by other truly great faculty. And it reminds me of a recent board meeting that we had where one of our alumni is actually Ryan Murphy, the 4 Olympic medal winner. I don't know if you know Ryan Murphy. He was actually recently graduated from our undergraduate program. And Ryan Murphy came and spoke to us, and he was talking about how he became the best swimmer in the world, literally. And he was talking about his training in Florida, and he said he would go to the pool and he would figure out who the other very fastest swimmer was and practice that day. And he would make sure to position himself in the lane right next to the very fastest swimmer, because being next to the fastest swimmer brought out the best in him. And that is why faculty want to be around the very best, because it brings out the best in them. And that is what we have going on right now here at Haas. It is such an exciting place to be. So I do want to take this moment to thank our senior leadership, including Jenny Chatman. And we have the other Associate Dean for Academic Affairs here tonight as well, Dawn Moore. Dawn, stand up. So they have really led the charge in this incredible faculty expansion. I'd also like to thank all of you, our alumni and friends at Haas, for all your efforts in this area. We have at least one board member who's here, Larissa Roach. Do we have any other Haas board members here tonight? I don't think we do. Okay. Now, your generosity allows us to attract and retain these amazing faculty, and you will have another opportunity to support us very soon. We have Berkeley's annual Big Give, which is 24 hours where you can give to Berkeley, will be on March 9th, which is next week. So let me now get to the reason why we're all here tonight. It is my pleasure to introduce Professor Jenny Chatman, who serves in many leadership roles here at Haas. The last time we had this event in person. I know that Jenny was also doing some interviewing. It was in the Gap building. In addition to her role as ADAA, Jenny is the Paul Cortese Distinguished Professor of Management. She's the co-director of the Berkeley Culture Center. She's also a proud alum with a bachelor's from UC Berkeley and a PhD from Haas. In her research, teaching, and consulting work, Jenny focuses on how organizations can leverage culture for strategic success and how diverse teams can optimize performance. Her award-winning research has shown, for example, how narcissistic leaders create organizational cultures that are lower in collaboration and integrity. She recently co-founded the Berkeley Culture Center to serve as a hub for the next generation of data-driven research on organizational culture. So please welcome Professor Jenny Chatman.
Hey, everybody. What a pleasure to see you all. So many friendly, familiar faces. It's so great to be here. I have the distinct thrill to introduce to you four of our new assistant professors. And I have to tell you, Don and I have been supporting Anne in this growth of the school's faculty for a couple of years now. And so we get to make what is my favorite phone call of the year, which is calling people to offer them the job. And as you can imagine, it's like the call of a lifetime for most of us who get this call. And so I've made, well over a dozen of these calls at this point. And there are all kinds of responses, from hoots and hollers to, bursting laughter, and even tears of joy. It's like a fantastic moment. So let me invite four of our newest professors to come out on the stage. We're going to start with, actually, wait, I have one more thing to say before we did that. We were doing different things about when you guys would come out. So anyway, let me do one more thing, and then I'll call Kiera out. So I should also tell you that once I give you the introductions of all of our fantastic faculty here tonight, you will see that we are in competition for them with the very best of the best, well-funded, deep pockets, other business schools. And add to that the fact that these four in particular were extraordinarily astute negotiators. So let me just tell you that we have to be very creative and very scrappy and dig deep and find packages that will attract and retain these just unbelievable faculty. I'm so proud of our ability to expand and diversify our faculty, and told you the numbers, right, 30% compared to when I started here. We're so much bigger and so much even more interesting than when I began. It's just a wonderful thing to behold. So with that, let me bring out our four outstanding professors. Kiera Hudson is the first one. Kiera, I feel like we should have some kind of some kind of music. Ambar Forgia, Sarah Moshary, and Valerie Zhang. And let me tell you a little bit about each of them. You're sort of not going to believe their records. It's really astounding to put it all together. So Kiera is an assistant professor in our Management of Organizations group. Her research focuses on two really, really important and interesting questions. One is, what are the social psychological roots of hierarchy? Why is it that we form hierarchies? How do we think about power and influence? And then how do these hierarchies intersect to influence people's experiences and perceptions? We lured Kiera out to the West Coast from the East Coast. She grew up in Albany, New York. She has her BA from Williams College in psychology and biology. Then she earned a PhD in social psychology at Harvard. She spent a couple of years at Yale, some of these lesser places. She did a postdoc there, and we brought her out to Haas. Welcome, Kiera. And I should mention that Kiera is teaching our new core course on managing in a diverse world. She's knocking it out of the park. She has to teach tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., but she's still with us today. So extra special thank you. Ambar Forgia is also an assistant professor in the Management of Organizations group. She studies the business side of healthcare with a particular focus on mergers and acquisitions, and how that affects healthcare outcomes, which it's surprising to make that connection. It's kind of a distant connection, you would think, but Ambar has these sort of really interesting findings about how things go. Ambar was born in Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic. She grew up in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Before joining Haas, she was an assistant professor at Columbia. We love getting them from another university. At the Mailman School of Public Health. She got her BA in economics and math at Swarthmore, and then her PhD in applied economics and managerial science from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. Welcome to Ambar. I mean, did I tell you these are impressive people? It's like amazing. Okay, Sarah Moshary is an assistant professor in our marketing group. Her interests lie at the intersection of marketing and public policy. Anyone needs to buy a car, you should talk to Sarah about it. Her recent work includes studies of digital advertising, the pink tax, and the demand for firearms. It's a super interesting intersection between economics and all kinds of social policy decisions that we make. Sarah also grew up in New York before joining Haas, and she was an assistant professor at the University of Chicago. Yes. And she spent time on the faculty at the University of Pennsylvania in the Department of Economics there. She earned her PhD from MIT and a BA in economics from Harvard College. Again, some kind of lesser institutions, but welcome, Sarah. She's doing a fantastic job. And I hope she won't mind sharing with you that she's actually the most productive of our 4 faculty sitting up here. 2 months ago, she gave birth to a baby boy, and I think this is like the second time she's been out to be with you, so thank you for that, Sarah. And last but not least, we have Valerie Zhang. Valerie is a new assistant professor in our accounting department. Her research looks at how Twitter outages disrupt the flow of financial information. Super interesting, right? How retail investors on Reddit influence other traders in their network, and how crypto traders utilize blockchain data, like the most timely topics that you can imagine, and Valerie is an expert at these. Valerie was born in Shanghai, China. She spent her teenage years in Toronto, Canada. She got her bachelor's degree in finance and economics and a master's in economics from the University of Toronto, and re-recruited her from where she got her PhD in accounting at Northwestern University. So it is my pleasure to introduce to you our 4. When Dean Harrison used the term rock star, she was not kidding. What I'd like to do is ask a couple of questions, and then we will have a little bit of time for you all to ask some questions as well. My first question is, you're all in your first year at Haas, and we're dying to know why you chose Haas and what it is that you're finding here as new professors.
Woo. So why Haas? I think Haas ended up being a very easy decision for me because I actually got my intellectual start here at Berkeley. So when I was at Williams, I was a biology major. I actually thought psychology was for people who couldn't hack it in the sciences. I don't believe that now, but I did a summer program once I figured out what my life should be. I did a summer program at Berkeley where I did not have a mentor for a variety of reasons, but happened to be reading about the work of Cameron Anderson and Dana Carney, people who are actually at Haas studying power. And so when I read their work, it was just like a lightning bolt came in my mind of, wow, like power is everywhere. And power, when I think about social identities, is the same thing as people who, like different aspects of the hierarchy. And so I've tried to come back to Berkeley so many times, and they have not let me. I tried to be Dana Carney's lab manager. She picked somebody else. I tried to do my PhD at Berkeley in the psych department. Keltner was not studying power anymore. He was studying something else. And so I went to Harvard, I guess, as my consolation prize. And when it came down to it, it was between the Harvard Kennedy School and here. And I chose here because I felt like if I didn't get a chance to to be here and to grow intellectually in a space where I got started, I would have regretted it. So that is why Haas.
I didn't know that. I'm learning a lot. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Jenny, Don, Anne, for hiring me and hiring the amazing scholars on stage. Like, we're so excited to be part of the Haas family. So before I was at Haas, I was an assistant professor of public health at Columbia University, but my research is on the business side of healthcare. So it makes sense. I was like, business schools, like that seems like a good place for my research. But I wanted to be at Haas because I wanted to be in a place that allowed me to question the status quo, if you will, and particularly when it came to my research. And it doesn't hurt that we have some of the top management and economic scholars in the world, and having access to those people and how quickly they've already become mentors and collaborators. I sometimes am still having a little bit of a pinch me moment to be walking in the same halls of people who have won like Nobel Prizes, and they're just like, I'll read your paper. And I'm like, what? Like, that's crazy. And so like to have that like intellectually stimulating environment has been so special. And I'm still kind of can't believe that we're here and that we get to be here. And so thank you for that. And I will say that one thing for me, especially when it came to choosing schools, was choosing a school that is at the forefront of incorporating and increasing diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging at the faculty level, but also the staff and the student level. And I really do think that Haas is the model for other business schools to follow.
Hello? Oh, there we go. So I'll echo a little bit what's been said, which is that a huge draw for me was the world-class faculty. As Jenny said, my background is in economics, and I got my PhD in economics at MIT, and then I actually taught political economy for a couple of years at the Department of Economics at the University of Pennsylvania. But then my research interests sort of shifted, and that led me to marketing, and I spent the last 4 years teaching in the marketing group at the University of Chicago at the Booth School of Business. So as you can see, my research interests are actually sort of broad. I'm definitely interested in marketing questions, but then also in incorporating elements from economics, from industrial organization, from political economy. And what's exciting to be here at Haas is that the faculty is exceptional in all of these areas, and it's really welcoming of work that sort of incorporates these different elements and brings them together. And so, to echo Ambar, I've had the opportunity already, just being here half a year, to learn from and to collaborate with world-class scholars from sort of across these different disciplines, and that's really exciting.
So I will once again echo what's being said, but I want to add some original thought to this debate as well. So I think one big reason is, I'm going to talk about my research in more depth, but my research, many people would not consider as traditional accounting research. I have gone to places and interview and talked to them about Twitter outages and decentralized finance platforms. And at those places, which I will not name, they look at me and they wonder, why would you define that as accounting research? And my answer to that was always, why shouldn't you define that as accounting research? And at Haas, I really felt that I really didn't need to do that here. Everybody was very welcoming of these ideas, even though they're a bit out there, they're a bit risky. They're in the wild west of financial industries, if you will. But this is what I want to do, and I have a great chance of doing it here. And so this, I think, is the obvious reason why I chose Haas.
Great. Excellent. Awesome. So we've kind of talked around each of your research programs, and I wanted to spend a minute just digging in for each of you to have a chance to share with our wonderful alum and friends who are here tonight, the essence of your research. Valerie, why don't you start us off, since you've piqued our interest with this Wild West research?
Okay, so I'm going to talk about maybe 3 papers or 3 ideas that I'm working with, thinking about all the time in my head. And the first one is really this idea of how information flows in social networks, and specifically how information flows on social media platforms in people in those networks. And once that flow of information is disrupted, i.e. when there's a Twitter outage, you see that investors underreact to financial information of the firm. So that is a big part of what I do. That's actually my job market paper. And then the other strand of literature is, well, we looked at Twitter, now let's look at Reddit. And there it's the same thing. It's about people interacting in the social networks on Reddit and how they influence each other. So there what we are able to do with the data on Reddit is that we can identify 3 different groups of investors. We've identified investors who are very fanatic about a firm. I think you've all seen posts like that on Reddit. They don't care about the fundamental value, they just want to buy the stock, right? GameStop as a perfect example. And what would happen is these investors would influence people in their social network on the social platform of Reddit. And the more influence they have, we have an empirical proxy for that, the more influence they have, and then the more positive they are about the stock, they can drive the price away more from fundamentals, so that we can empirically document not only for GameStop, but for all the other stocks that are on the social platform, and not only for the period of January 2021, but along our sample period. So that is pretty cool. Surprisingly, I have a student, when I was talking about my research, they also are trying to start a startup using Reddit data to inform retail investors. So I had the opportunity to actually talk to them and try to give them some unnecessary advice. But it's great that I'm also at a place where I can communicate to students and they're interested in the subject. I'm just going to take maybe 1 more minute to talk about the decentralized finance paper, which has consumed most of my waking thoughts these days. So in that paper, the cool thing about markets like that, markets built on blockchain, is that information about every trade is instantaneously public information. And there is just so much information out there. So the natural research question is, if I am an investor, how do I take advantage of this information? I can see what everybody is doing. I can see that information in real time. And I also have a historic record of that information. So we thought, like any rational investor, if I could get access and process that information, I can just pick out the people who are doing really well and see if they are doing well persistently, and maybe we can follow whatever they do. I don't need to know how to do very well. I can just piggyback on their ideas. And so we thought that's a way to make money. Turns out it is a way to make money, but people don't really do that. And that's the really surprising part about markets on blockchain platforms, is that even though there's a lot of information, people still need to know how to process it. They still need to know how to utilize that information. And also, interestingly enough, I have students who are in crypto. They have a crypto startup, and I'm not going to tell you their ideas, but they also came to me and talked to me about how to start their business. And again, I also give them some of my advice, which I'm sure they listen to very politely. So that is sort of my research and how I sort of communicate that to my students.
Super interesting. Thank you, Valerie. Sarah, how about giving us an abstract of your work?
Sure. So as Jenny said, my work is at the intersection of marketing and public policy. And so I'll give you one example from a project that I'm excited about, also thinking about quite a bit, which is looking at gender-based targeting in consumer packaged goods. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is the phenomenon where a company sells one version of their product marketed towards women at one price, and then a second version of the product that's targeted at men at a different price. You might have heard this referred to by the media and in policy circles as the pink tax, because there's a concern that the women's version is typically more expensive. And so then women are paying a sort of additional tax, if you will, persistently across a bunch of different types of goods. And if you Google the pink tax, you will see some pictures of examples that folks have taken in stores where you can see the typical one is like the pink disposable razor that's $2 more expensive than the blue disposable razor, even though they otherwise, apart from the color, basically look identical. But what we noticed when we started this project is that there wasn't really systematic evidence about these price differences to help guide policy. And so we're leveraging data from thousands of products, from thousands of retailers all across the country to try and understand, well, how big is this price difference? And then, hopefully, help policymakers, help guide them when they're thinking about legislation that could make a difference. We also encountered some surprises in the project because we found when we were actually doing that apples-to-apples comparison, okay, let's look for the same product or substantially similar products being marketed to women and men. When we actually look at those apples-to-apples comparisons, the price differences are really, really small. It does not look like there's a big pink tax. But if you just look at the sort of average prices, say for deodorants or shampoos or bar soap, yes, women's products are on average more expensive. What's key in this industry is differentiation. So women's products don't look or don't tend to look like men's products. Right? They have different ingredients. And so it's sort of tricky to unpack, okay, well, what is accounting for this price difference? And I think it's opened up for us a whole research agenda that's trying to understand, well, why is it that companies are making different products to sell to men versus to sell to women? Ostensibly, we might think, okay, well, maybe demand looks different. I'm an economist, so I'm thinking about demand a lot. But then there's a question of, well, why are there demand differences for something like body wash, or where is that coming from? What's the role of advertising? And so these are things where we're just starting to think about now that we sort of have established some basic facts about the industry, and hope to have much more to say about that in the future.
Great. So far I'm getting buy blue stuff and stay out of blockchain. Okay. Ambar, tell us about your work.
Sure. So I study the corporate transformation of American medicine, which is often referred to as corporatization, which is often driven by mergers and acquisitions by insurers, hospitals, and increasingly private equity companies, where I'm sure you've seen the headlines splashed all over the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times saying, like, major corporate takeover is going to kill your patients because big corporate profits are always going to be put ahead of the best interest of patients. And I study this tension between a shareholder's financial responsibilities for what's at the best interest of the patients. And I'm interested in investigating the settings or the conditions under which corporate ownership is a good thing or a bad thing for patients and society. And so one paper I'm working on right now that I'm really excited about looks at when large corporate chains acquire fertility clinics that provide in vitro fertilization services. So it's a really fascinating setting because increasingly more and more people are delaying having children until their 30s, which increases their probability of needing IVF. But IVF is crazy expensive, and it actually has a low probability of success. So don't want to scare anybody here, but if you're under 35, your chance of success is around 40%, and once you're in your 40s, that drops down to 5%. And so understanding how corporate ownership impacts those outcomes is really important. And on the one hand, you could imagine, oh, okay, like a big chain, they can help bring economies of scale, they could standardize practices, they could bring in capital to hire more staff, to hire new technologies. This could enhance quality. On the other hand, why invest in quality if you could increase prices and cut costs and increase your shareholder returns, particularly in private equity where there might be pressure to have short-term return for shareholders? And so much of the literature in this space has actually found a lot more of these negative outcomes, including some of my own past research. But what's surprising about this setting is that I'm finding really big positive outcomes from corporate ownership, where IVF volume increases by 28% and the success rates via live birth rates increases by 13%. Really big positive effects. And so now I'm starting to unpack this puzzle of why. What's so special about fertility clinics where there's all these positive impacts? And what we're concluding is that actually the fertility space has a lot of quality and price transparency because of a law that was passed in 1992 where you can go online and find the quality outcomes of all fertility clinics in the United States. So you can actually shop around for healthcare, where, as I'm sure of any of you who have interacted with the healthcare system, it can be really hard to know who's a high quality doctor and prices. Well, you know, that's going to come 6 months later, and then you're going to be like, oh my God, like how was this one procedure? How did getting a Band-Aid cost $200? And so the fertility sector kind of provides this setting where markets actually appear to be working and kind of this like microcosm of what healthcare could look like if there was more price and quality transparency.
That's so interesting. Fascinating. Kiera, tell us about your work.
Okay. So I realize that all of y'all had surprising findings in your work. I don't know if I'm very surprised by my findings, but that also motivates part of why I do the work that I do. I want to do the water is wet research. It's the research that if I were to talk to my grandmother, she would say, of course, that's how race works. That's how gender works. But when it comes to the empirical evidence to support it, it's non-existent. And so when I think about why I study hierarchy in order to make hierarchy more equitable. And the way to do that is to do the work that if you talk to people that tend to be at the bottom of that hierarchy would tell you this is how things work. So one, and I'm a psychologist by training, and so I do a lot of the psychological mechanisms that support hierarchy. So one example would be the role of stereotypes. We all know what stereotypes are, and when I talk to my students in the DEI course, I talk about how stereotypes simultaneously describe the value that society places on you, as well as constrain it. And the value would be this idea of descriptive stereotypes, and the constraint are these normative stereotypes, what you should do. So women are not only supposed to be they are not assertive, but they're also not supposed to be assertive. Now, in my work, I look at the intersection of identities when it comes to stereotypes. When we talk about women, do those stereotypes apply to women of different racial and sexual orientations? And the answer is not so much. So when we talk about the stereotypes, for example, of lesbian women, and I'm gay, so FYI, so I guess I'm doing a little bit of me search, but I asked like, hey, I want to know these stereotypes. When I ask about what traits should lesbian women display, what I find is that lesbian women are allowed to be assertive and forceful, these more personality traits, but they're not supposed to have business sense, be intelligent, be career-oriented compared to gay men or straight women. So there seems to be this difference in how lesbian women's behaviors are constrained. And without that intersectional nuance, we might be misinforming what lesbian women should and should not do around like leaning in versus not. So that's one aspect of my work. Another aspect of my work now, I'm a jack of all trades, and so this is going to be a huge pivot. But the other aspect of my work that I use to think about hierarchy are emotions. And so one emotion in particular that I study is the role of schadenfreude. Has anyone heard of this. Okay, yeah. So Schadenfreude, I think the Webster Google searches of Schadenfreude shot up about 2,000,000% when Trump got COVID, in part because Schadenfreude is when you feel pleasure at another person's pain. And so I think a lot of people felt Schadenfreude when Trump got COVID. And so you might be wondering, well, what does that have to do with hierarchy? In my own work, I found that when people feel Schadenfreude, they are much more likely to support policies that harm marginalized groups. That there's something about this emotion that leads people to want to engage in harm, want to support harm. And we can think about how that might work in settings, or at least Schadenfreude comes out in more competitive settings. We can think about a lot of situations in which competition gets activated, and what are the emotional impacts on marginalized folks in those settings. So that's a little bit of what I do.
Fantastic. So super interesting. I think I have time for one more question. As you noticed, these are 4 women professors. And so at a time of immense change in society, how do you all feel about the opportunities to teach our women business leaders and their allies? What does that opportunity seem like for you? And anyone can start. You want to start, Ambar?
I got the mic up first. It's like Jeopardy. So I've had the pleasure of teaching the core leading people class. And when I was designing how I wanted to teach that class, one of the core messages that I wanted to get across, it was about aligning your personal values with your professional self, and especially your professional role and how that's defined. Where I feel like a lot of time, especially for women business leaders, there's a lot of pressure to minimize yourself or conform to certain workplace norms, but you don't have to compromise who you are to get forward in your career. And that's honestly, for me, something that I'm still learning and practicing, because I used to feel like I had to tone down who I was to be taken seriously in academia, from small things to how I would dress to big things like the type of research that I would pursue. But I realized the more I tried to tone myself down, that I was also kind of dampening my spirits and my creativity, the very things that I think, the things I bring to the table. And so I'm trying my best now to practice what I preach, and to preach that also in my teaching, and to just show up as my full self and my most authentic self. And so I think that's kind of a key message I'm trying to get across in my classroom.
Great, thank you. Sarah, Valerie?
So I guess women with opportunity and change, women leaders and women students. Okay, so I teach that to my male students too. I teach the same thing, which is not to be afraid of those changes and opportunities, right? So in class, I sometimes bring up crypto, and for students who are not interested, or who they are maybe interested, but they don't know that much about it, so they are naturally a bit shy to think about subjects like that, I just suggest them, try to understand the new things that are happening around you. Try to get some exposure. You don't need to be an expert, but you can understand the business behind it, the ideas behind it. And I think for women students in particular, they might not feel like they have the technical depth to understand these subjects, but I still try to at least encourage them to think that they can do that. And in in a world of technology and change, I just think it's nice to open and welcome those changes.
Go.
So to sort of piggyback on that, for me, one of the things I try to communicate in my class is the value, the importance of thinking strategically, for example, when there are new opportunities, and then how to think strategically. So I teach pricing, and one place where this shows up is that when you're thinking about changing your price, you want to be thinking about how your competitors might react to that price change, right? So maybe if you increase prices, that's going to lead your competitor to increase their price. And then you want to be thinking about, okay, well, what would that mean for your pricing decision at that point? So you don't want to just be thinking out your next move, you want to be thinking about your second move too. And so that kind of strategic thinking, I think, is helpful not only for pricing, but in other business decisions and in other arenas in life as well.
Great, thank you. Kiera.
So I teach in the full-time MBA program, the core DEI course. And the thing that I am really excited to teach and also to embody is to make things more complicated, to nuance the conversation. So I'm a queer Black woman, and I think for some folks, this might be the first time that they've had a queer Black woman as a professor. I'm also first gen, but I went to Williams and I went to Harvard, and that's actually how I got interested in intersectionality in the first place, of my own experiences complicating the conversation. And so when I think about the importance of naming things, that is one thing that I've felt like has been a really important part. When we talk about these psychological processes, I've had, especially women students, come up to me and said, I've always felt that, I never had a word for it. And the fact that this is a core course means that not only are women hearing these things, but their male allies are also hearing these things too. And so bringing awareness, I think, to the complexity of people's experiences is something that I'm hoping to continue to impart.
Fantastic, thank you. Did I tell you they were terrific? Come on. So we have time for some questions from you all. What, please.
So all of your topics obviously have significant social impact, with impacts to equity, healthcare, and financial management. And so, and all of you are educating our future business leaders, both at the undergrad and MBA level. So my question is, in the theme of business should be a force for good, how do you teach today's students, like if you look at some of the past innovation, everything from Facebook to Uber and DoorDash, you could argue it's negatively affected the labor market in terms of part-time, no benefits on those Ubers, et cetera, everything from Facebook and disinformation and affecting children. How do we train, develop leaders for the future as you teach these classes and have these great learnings, where there are these nuanced decisions about business models, and they make a decision. Everyone's trying to get high valuation, great exits. They're focused on that as entrepreneurs, getting it off the ground. But there is the model that has societal impact. How do we train people to pause, think, and maybe pivot and negatively affect market value maybe to do the right thing?
So it's a super easy question. Who'd like to take a run at that one? Yeah, go ahead.
So you're absolutely right. And that's something that we explicitly have them model or try to model in our DEI class. So I don't know if we have any students who are good. Are you in the Wednesday class? Yeah. Okay, so let me not say what you're about to do tomorrow, but part of the exercise that we have them go through is we give them a problem. We're like, here's a problem. Now go solve it. And one of the things that tends to come out when they do that is, wow, this is much more complicated than I realized. And what we also have them do, we have other students act as stakeholders. So we have some of them mock, like, you are the consumer base, you are journalists, you are the people who currently work there. And what they've started to realize is it's really easy to say, this is what I'm going to do, but who's going to make that sacrifice? Where does that sacrifice come from? And actually talking about how when you want to make equitable change, there is always a sacrifice. Hammering that home is actually something that the DEI class has actually tried to do. So we've taught this model called the press model in particular that talks about you have to understand the problem, you have to figure out whether or not you care enough, and then figure out the solution. And we talk about it like weight loss. There's all these different ways of losing weight, but at the end of the day, it comes down to persistence. And so hammering that home, I think, is something that's important, and we're hoping that they then take that information into other people's classes and continue to think through, hey, this is complicated.
That's a great response. And I feel like it's also like in the classroom, right, where we have this opportunity. And so in teaching leading people, we've also done kind of similar experiments in the class, or not experiments per se, but we'll assign a case study of a leader. And half the class will give this leader whose company like may or may not have killed like 1,000 people. And we're like, is this a good leader or is this a bad leader? And half the class is like 10 out of 10, perfect leader. The other half is like 0 out of 10, they killed people, you know. And so it leads to these like really intense debates of how much are you willing to put people or profits over people. And by the end, I've had students come up to me and be like, wow, like on paper, like, and because I was looking at the business thing, I thought this was a great leader. I never thought to define them on these other dimensions of like how they treat their workforce. And then we start talking about things like, I'll ask a little poll question. I'm like, how much do you think it costs to replace a worker? You know, they're like, 10% of their salary. And it's like, no, it's 250% of their salary. And so you really want your workforce to be happy and to retain that workforce. And so to think about the well-being of the people who are working for you as well, because the more that you lose them, the harder it is to attract more talent. And you find these companies that fall into this trap where they have a terrible reputation and cannot attract any good quality workers. And so thinking about those reputational effects as well, when people are starting to think about business decisions at the startup idea, not just after it's too big and it's already rife with problems.
Great. Good. Thank you. Other questions? Questions, please. There's going to be a mic coming around to you.
Thank you. My name is JP. I'm a second-year student about to graduate. One of the things that I noticed pretty early on at Haas is that there's a really diversity of thought in the classroom and among my students, but there isn't much diversity of thought that's actually vocalized. A lot of my classmates, and this is something I came to realize recently, not in the beginning, particularly because that vocalized thought is a lot of that I tend to agree with, come from the East Coast, not too much difference in the majority of what people think here. But I do have a lot of classmates that are international, that are from different parts of the country, that think lean differently politically. But in class, they tend to stay silent because they fear mostly like social ostracization. Thank you, sorry for that. And my thing is, even if I don't agree with them, I want to hear what they have to say because they're still sitting right next to me. I value their opinion. I respect them. What I realize is that what I've seen is that the professors do a really good job of making us lead the conversations in class. They really want to put us in that position. But then I do feel like more could be done to empower those people that tend to stay silent. I'm curious, this is kind of targeting, this is like, yeah, the hierarchy part. I'm curious, like, what can be done? What do you guys think can be done so that I'm hearing all of the thoughts, and that fear of being labeled as the Republican, or frankly, that's what it is. That's what people are feared of being called, goes away because I want to, even if I don't agree with them, I want to hear them. Sorry.
Another softball question. So, who wants to solve social conflict right here on the stage? You want to? Yeah.
That shot. So the hard part about all of this is you need enough buy-in to be vulnerable, but then you also need to have enough psychological safety that when you're vulnerable, people hear you. And so at least in our DEI class, and I think probably in a lot of classes, we go over norms, but the important part is to let people express themselves in not quite anonymous ways, but in ways that allow the thought to come out, and then we can talk about it once it's on the table. It's a little easier to go, hey, I might agree with something that someone else said versus being the first one to say it. And I think that is one thing that we try to do in the DEI class. So one of the first classes we do is an identity class. And so even if someone puts that they're a Republican, there are 11 other things, and those 11 other things are ways that you can connect with another person. And we know that when you have these cross-cutting identities, there are some things that you and I are similar on, and there are some things that we are absolutely not similar on. And if we can connect on the ways that we're similar, we can weather the storm of the conflict in opinions of the things that we differ. And I think that that's something that the students also have to then buy in to themselves. It's not just the faculty being the ones to have people feel vulnerable and listen to their classmates. I think it's a broader process. And so I'm hoping that over time that'll be something that is felt more and more as the DEI content across classes become more centralized and more intentional. And so I have a feeling if you were to come back in 3 years, things will be different.
Which you can do. We have a program for that. You can come. I actually thought you were going to talk about the science of perspective taking, which is something we all think a lot about as well. And there are even ways that you can do social construction where you assign people to these different categories that they may not hold, just so that they can feel the flavor of what it would be like to have that perspective. I mean, our instructors are, doing a lot of social engineering in their teaching. They're not just conveying content. I think most of our faculty think about the classroom as 70%, 60% content, 40% social dynamics. So your question is one, I think, that is on everybody's mind. I'm not sure that we have perfected the answer yet, but it's something that we're certainly striving towards addressing. Yeah, please.
Thank you. Steve Terasaki. I'm an executive leadership coach, and I have a question for all of you. So much of what we at alums of the Haas Business School see ourselves as really important pieces of making an ability to make change and create change and in the communities and the people we're involved with. So how do you in your teaching encourage your students to really think of themselves as leaders, of being able to move the needle in ways that they can truly impact the future of society, of the things that really matter, that we as Haas alumni really want to take on and have a huge ability to make that change. So question for you is, what are you doing in your teaching to this broad segment of the student population to make them really think about what it is that they can be as leaders in the future?
Yeah, so I'm going to, what I do is I think I tell them in the context of financial accounting, I tell them what I know, I tell them what I see is going on in the world, and I propose a possible future, or I nudge them in a direction that I see might be possible. So just to give you a concrete example, annual reports of companies have been gotten longer. They are longer and longer over time. So you have more and more, as investors, you have more and more information you need to process for a company on an annual basis. At the same time, we have technology, natural language processing, we have machine learning that can extract key information from financial statements very quickly, and they can help investors automate some of the information processing. And so I put the two pieces together, and then I ask my students, what do you think accounting will look like in 10 years, 20 years, or 30 years? How do you think people are going to use accounting information? And I sort of just let them think about it and let them explore this area on their own, and we actually, and then discuss a case study specifically written to help them think along those lines. So I basically tell them what I think is happening and try to guide them to think of a new future where there's change.
So because I teach leading people, I get a lot more license in the types of things I can do in my classroom. And one thing most of my class I was teaching on the Saturday weekend program, so people were working full-time, a lot of them in the tech sector as engineers, like super technical, and I'm teaching them about leadership. And I think a really important part about leadership is vulnerability. No one wants to be vulnerable, right? I think Brene Brown kind of talks about this a lot, and I assigned them some of her YouTube clips about trying to instill vulnerability, but how do you make someone be vulnerable? So at the end of, it's like a 4-hour class, 2 hours in, I said, all right, everybody, I'm gonna have you in your Haas teams do a lip sync battle. You have 45 minutes to put together a lip sync routine, and you will compete against your peers, and you will grade each other on a rubric based on creativity, quality of the lip sync, and the amount of teamwork. And whoever wins via votes is gonna get an extra point on their final exam for this classroom. So I raised the stakes, and I mean, the silence in the audience. They're like, you have to be kidding me. And I was like, this could go really bad. What am I doing? But wow, everybody, this group of engineers like really brought their A games to this lip sync battle. They got so into it. It was filmed. And afterwards, people were like, you have to do this in every class. Like, I feel so close to my peers. I feel like I learned to work in a team. I learned to let my guard down. Never in a million years would I have done this. I'm now going to make people at my work do this. I was like, don't do that. And I usually keep that as a surprise, so I'm sorry to my future students that you now have an advantage, so you can start preparing your lip sync routines now. But I thought it was just a very, the older we get, the less time we have for fun. And I think giving an opportunity to just let loose, have fun, be vulnerable meant a lot to the students when it came to embodying that leadership component.
Thank you. So, yeah. So we had one more question here. I think this is going to be the last one.
Oh God, that's a lot of pressure.
Make it good.
Hello, I'm Mei Lee Howe, and I was in EMBA 19, and it's so nice to see such a broader group of professors. Very exciting, especially a lot more women, which is awesome. When I was in EMBA 19, we had a pilot program, where we had a pilot class taught by Dr. Jennifer Cohen, and she taught a DEI course, kind of like an introduction to DEI. And several of us went into that class. It was a small group of people. I forgot what the competing course at the time was, but there's always that other class that's going on at the same time that people might want to go to and that kind of thing. And a lot of the work that we did in that class was trying to figure out why all the business cases were kind of dated, right? They had the older white man as the CEO, the leader, right? Kind of really studying old business cases. And one of the things that we did was kind of tease that out and propose. This is what we want to see in the future, that, the business cases in the MBA program should be newer, should be fresher, they should have leaders that are diverse. And I'm just curious where we're at now in your classes, if you're using business cases. I'm just curious how things are going. Status.
Thanks for that. So.
Chair of the board for the Center for Equity, Gender, and Leadership. I want to talk to all of y'all. And one of the things that we did as a research center was to put together a case compendium. So we now have, and it's on our website, it's available. All of the content is not available. Howie is working on that actually right now. Howie can, if anyone is interested in underwriting this, it's very expensive to get it to all be open architecture. But we do have a case compendium that is put together where the leaders are women and people of color and people of different sexualities. So that is definitely a huge stride that we have made, and it is available to faculty. It's just not available to the general public.
Thank you, Larissa. Larissa was in my class back in the day, 5,000 years ago. She looks amazing. Yeah, that's an amazing resource. Thank you for your leadership of EGAL, the center, and for that wonderful resource. I actually wrote a case that you all supported about one of your classmates who was operating in the pandemic in the city of San Francisco. Yeah, exactly.
I feel like I have to answer. But so real talk, there's not a ton of diverse cases. Like, that's a reality. And part of that comes down to who writes them. And not all even business schools incentivize writing cases. And so my co-teacher, Drew Jacoby Singor, we ran into a lot of issues of how do we find cases that accurately reflect the diversity of the people in our classes. And so one way that we addressed that was to actually not use cases and to do exercises that were meant to grapple with the thing that the case was supposed to do. And so as an example, we do the numbers game where we assign people a number, and I'm like giving away all my secrets, but we assign everyone a number and we tell them, go out and create groups of the highest number possible. And so you end up with some white men who are ones, you end up with a Latino who's a 10, and having that experience. And then you have some people who are just 5s. And so then they talk about those experiences of what does it mean to be overlooked? What does it mean to be targeted? How did you know your number? And some people were wildly off, some people were accurate. And I guess we could have had a case that did that exact same thing, but it felt more powerful to have these exercises to embody the thing that we wanted to happen. So I don't know, there's like a structural issue when it comes to cases. And so I think one way that folks have tried to solve it is to just not use cases and to really ground it in the experiences of the folks in the room.
Thank you for those great questions. I think you all expect of us to be students always, and we are. We're not perfect yet.
I was just going to offer to build on that.
This
one
is
of
Alida Bautista,
Hi, everybody.
our Director of Diversity, our fantastic, who's doing just a phenomenal job. I know she's been connected to many of you. Please, Alida.
Just wanted to also address Miley's question by building on what Kiera shared, is that we also added a new staff member, Queen Jax, who is supporting our faculty in integrating the diversity and using the EGAL compendium as a tool, as well as classroom observations, consultations. I got to meet with the faculty when they first joined, but now we have Queen doing that work that supports even just thinking about what's the content on the slides, what are the visuals. Yeah. So where are there multiple spaces for opportunities for integrating diversity that goes beyond the case, given Kiera's comment about those challenges of structurally who gets incentivized and who doesn't get incentivized to write cases, that limits the amount of diversity in existing cases and the challenges that we've faced at Haas that are rooted in that as well.
And Alida has led our faculty, who are sometimes very irascible, through some excellent exercises attempting to get at the issue that you were raising, of making sure all voices are heard, trying to ensure that we minimize our own blind spots in the classroom. You've done a brilliant job, and we're incredibly grateful. So thank you, Alida. So listen, we've kept you long enough. I hope you leave here feeling a little bit more informed, right? You learned about blockchain, you learned about the pink tax, you learned about healthcare and fertility, you learned what Schadenfreude means, right? And inspired. I know I'm inspired, and I already knew them, so I can only imagine. And hopeful of the possibilities ahead at Haas. I can't thank each of you enough for having come here this evening, taken time out of your incredibly busy schedules. Our assistant professors are under a lot of pressure. They have a lot of pressure to do well in the classroom, to develop an original, innovative research program. Thank you all for being here tonight. Magnificent. And thank you all for continuing to be major parts of our community at Haas. We love our alumni. We love our current students. We want to see as much of you as possible at all times. So thank you for being here tonight and sharing with us your joy and connection to Haas. Remember, next Thursday is our Big Give. This is a proud event for us, and I hope you'll join me in supporting Haas during our 24-hour campaign. The Haas School is always in the lead at the university. Let's keep it that way. Have a wonderful rest of your evening, and of course, go Bears. Good night, everybody. Thank you.